Story 1. My former boss used to eat during video calls and then floss her teeth with her hair that was still attached to her head, in full view of all of us. She would then tuck the hair behind her ear and continue with the meeting. Story 2. I knew a guy in high school who would sit in class and spend ages scratching all of his dandruff onto his desk, then pat it neatly into a pile, check around to see that nobody was looking, and eat the pile one pinch at a time. He also regularly used his nose as a mid-face snack dispenser. Update. Just for interest's sake, the same guy reached out to me years later out of nowhere, asking me on a date. His qualifications were that he's very tall now and earns lots of money. I politely declined. Story 3. This carnival I saw a girl standing, urinating herself and kissing a guy at the same time. Urine going down her legs and everything on a Sunday afternoon party. Story 4. In the mid-1990s, I was shadowing a salesman, and we were about to give a big presentation that had the potential to result in a huge contract for our company. While we were in the elevator on the ride up, he passed gas and immediately realized he had soiled himself. He hit the emergency stop on the elevator, stripped, took off his underwear, and wiped with his undershirt. All the while, laughing so hard he couldn't control himself and continued to soil his slacks. He wiped the slacks off, put the underwear and the t-shirt in the trash can, and acted like nothing had happened. When he reached over and started the elevator again, I pressed the button for the very next floor, walked to another elevator, and left the building. Of course, I was fired for leaving. Unfortunately for him, the elevator had an old-school closed-circuit camera, and the whole thing was caught on video. The buddy who had gotten me the job told me that the next day the boss played the video for everyone. Story 5. At a work event, I saw a woman stick her hands down the back of her pants and scratch, then smelled her hand. I no longer eat any of the homemade desserts she brings in. Story 6. My mom never closed the door in the bathroom after a while. I once walked by and saw her in a towel cleaning the hair out of her razor with my toothbrush. I said, "What the heck?" I got my first paycheck from my first job that day, and I immediately went to a store and got a new one. I get home, and my old one was sitting in a cup of rubbing alcohol, as if that makes it better. Story 7. I was shopping in a relatively expensive boutique. I used to go there about 5 times a year for clothes for various social events. Basically, they knew me there and I knew everyone. Anyways, I was in the dressing room and heard what sounded like a loud, wet noise from outside the room. There wasn't a door on the changing room, but a long velvet curtain, very heavy. I poked a finger between the curtain and the wall because I was partly clothed, not interested in exposing myself, and saw the shop manager, not the person assisting me who was getting a dress for me to try, with pants down, bent over, looking at himself in the floor-length mirror. He sort of fingered around the area for a second, picked at something, sniffed his finger, gave another once-over inspection, then pulled up his pants and shuffled off. I got dressed and told the assistant what I had witnessed. She didn't even pretend to act shocked. She just sighed and apologized. I never went back. Story 8. My brother, during Christmas lunch, was way too absorbed in his phone. I think he forgot where he was, as he picked his nose and ate it. Also, my friend pulled out a breast and began popping nipple pimples, then smelling them. Story 9. A guy I used to work with ran the gamut of body odor, picked his nose and ate it, etc. One day in the lunchroom, he clipped his toenails into a pile, then swept them into his hand and tossed them into his mouth. I just gagged a bit thinking of the crunching sound it made. Story 10. I saw a drunk guy stumble into the street and was hit by a work van traveling at 50 miles per hour. He died. I was 4 when that happened. My dad turned to me and said, "That's why you look both ways before crossing the street." Story 11. Last Easter, my boyfriend's 80-year-old father was standing at the dessert table at his house after we had gone over there for a holiday dinner. From across the room, I watched him pick up the cake knife, a big butter knife type, that had been used to cut a big dessert cake. He pretty much deep-throated the knife to suck all of the cake frosting off. I must have been the only one watching him do this, with my jaw open. He was very nonchalant and casual about it, not looking sneaky or rushed at all, but as if it were the most natural thing in the world to do. He then very casually just put the cake knife back down on the table next to the cake for the next person to use and walked away. I jumped up, grabbed the cake knife, went behind his back to the kitchen sink, and threw it in the sink. It's not my place to start a family argument about this in his house, but that was absolutely disgusting. I am now completely put off by food in their house, especially their homemade desserts. It's not dementia or anything like that. He 100% has all his marbles. Story 12. I watched a coworker walk to a corner of our building. I could see her through gaps in the shelves. She reached into her rear and very obviously scratched herself rather aggressively, then pulled her hand out and smelled it, then went about her day like nothing. No hand washing, no trip to the bathroom to handle whatever the issue was. Just continue on with your day. Story 13. I have to add mine since I don't see one like it. While driving in Phoenix, I looked over to see the shirtless driver in the car next to me slowly rubbing his nipples in circles with his fingertips. It's been 6 years and I still think about it. Story 14. Shoot a woodpecker with a .308 hunting rifle on a deer hunting trip. I was walking back towards camp at dusk and stopped when I caught sight of him aiming, thinking he'd sighted a buck. Follow the line of sight just before seeing the woodpecker evaporate into a cloud of feathers. The person was a redneck who was invited by a friend of mine, and he would shoot spotted fawns and say things like, "If it's brown, it's down." I had long hair and hunted strictly for sustenance. I hate killing but like knowing where my food comes from. He couldn't understand why it was a problem shooting a woodpecker just to kill something. We had words and it got pretty tense. He offered to go to yard, Florida term for fistfight, and quickly backed down when I started putting my gear down to confront him. I hate fighting, but it was frustrating. I could never understand people who kill just because. Story 15. I gave a homeless guy $1 in his right hand, and he immediately extended his left hand to me. It was covered in some sort of clear slime. I recoiled instantly and excused myself from the conversation. Story 16. This was me. I emptied all the ash and cigarette butts from the ashtray of my car. I dumped it in a parking lot and was seen by a father and his young child. The child asked, "What is he doing, Daddy?" "He's littering. You shouldn't do that." I felt terrible and deservedly so. I was 17 and foolish. I quit smoking at 19. The good thing is that this still bothers me almost 20 years later. Story 17. The guy at Whole Foods who tasted every soup using the serving ladle, this was like 10 years ago. He tasted every single one. I have never gone back to self-serve anything. People are animals. I also went on a cruise and a woman was touching all the buffet food and licking her fingers the whole time, tasting things with her fingers. Her son was also doing the same thing. Story 18. I used to work at a retail technology store. I watched a woman from my service desk walk down the aisle and put her hand down the back of her pants. She rubbed up and down many times, stopped without removing her hand, and ran to the bathroom. I can only assume that she was about to soil herself or already had and just realized it. It was absolutely disgusting. I kept hand sanitizer with me for the rest of the day. Story 19. My brother last night. He pooped, and I went in after him to relieve myself. I noticed he forgot to flush, and better yet, there was no toilet paper in the bowl. Conflicted, I asked him, "Why is there no toilet paper in the bowl?" "We don't have a bidet." My brother said, "Well, there was no toilet paper to begin with." I asked, "Did you get in the shower to wash off?" My brother replied, "No." I asked, "Is there poop on your butt?" My brother answered, "Yes." This man decided to pull his pants up after dropping a load, didn't wipe, didn't wash, pulled his pants up, and let the fecal matter remain, then got on his bed to play Roblox. He just started middle school too. Story 20. When I was in the infantry, we were participating in field exercises one cold winter day. While patrolling, a guy spit up a loogie onto a nearby bush. It was freezing, and the loogie started solidifying. A sergeant came right up to the bush and sucked that loogie in like a spaghetti noodle. I still gag thinking about it. Story 21. A couple of weeks ago, my cousin and her 3 young sons came to visit us at our cabin. We were just serving supper outside when she had to assist her 3-year-old to pee on our grass that we lovingly tend to and were just playing badminton on. She went straight from holding the child's private area to serving her supper. Unwashed hands went straight into the bag of shredded cheese. The cheese went into the garbage can. A few minutes later, the 6-year-old also peed on the grass, and the 3-year-old joined in. Then, a few minutes later, they were literally rolling where they had just peed. Suffice it to say, I cleaned for hours after they left and washed every piece of fabric in my cabin. Story 22. I used to work in government housing, including Section 8, elderly, and disabled. Part of my job was to weed whack and mow the lawns on top of the maintenance. I was weed whacking, and a big chunk of something flew into my mouth. I thought I had hit a frog by accident, and a chunk had hit me in the mouth. I wiped it and immediately smelled feces. One of the tenants in the area I was weed whacking had schizophrenia and had been defecating on the lawn and dumping jars of urine on the balcony. I had weed whacked a piece of his feces into my mouth. Absolutely horrifying. Story 23. This will probably get buried, but here goes. When I was a kid, my folks stayed at a bed and breakfast place in the United Kingdom. We thought it was strange that the cereal was already distributed in bowls around the table in the communal dining area. Being somewhat mistrustful of food being left open like that, none of us ate it. Turns out our instincts were right. I had forgotten my sweater, so I ran back for it just as the lady who was running the place was clearing up. I caught her pouring the uneaten cereal back into the boxes. The look of oddly defiant guilt on her face when she was caught red-handed was something 10-year-old me was just not equipped to handle. I turned around and walked back out without saying a word. I did tell my mom, though. The kicker to this? I had accidentally sneezed all over mine. Story 24. I watched a homeless guy make vigorous love to a trash bin. He was really going at it. Finished and walked off with his pants still down around just one leg. Story 25. Some creep on the bus got up from his seat to purposely sit where two young ladies had been sitting. The plastic-like faux leather seats, anyway, his enthusiasm to leap there straight away, given he wasn't sharing his seat already, was a bit off to begin with. But then he wiped the palms of his hands over the seats and started sniffing them. The creep. Story 26. I watched a woman in full business attire stop in the downtown of a major city, pick a piece of gum off the sidewalk, put it in her mouth, and carry on her merry way. Story 27. Went to the bank for work. It was at Kroger, so a lot of people were there. This guy was at a different teller and had a large belly. He lifted it up to rest on the counter. The shirt wasn't covering it. I feel like if the shirt was on it, it would have been a little better. But no. A big hairy belly was being propped up on the side of the counter, where wheelchair users can place their stuff to write on or to place purses on to dig through. I will never get over that. Story 28. A lady sitting next to me on an airplane stuck her hand down the front of her pants, scratched, pulled it out and smelled it. Then she played with whatever she had on her fingers for a little bit before wiping it on her pants. Later on in the flight, she took some gum out of her mouth and stuck it on the back of the tray table. I glared at her and handed her a napkin, and she then unstuck it and put it in the napkin. Thankfully, it was a short flight, but I was absolutely disgusted. She had to be in her 40s, by the way. Story 29. I think I mentioned this in some hiking forum or something, but I was out hiking and going up a hill. I rounded a bend in the trail and was confronted by a big, proud rear. It was a woman dropping her drawers to urinate right in the middle of the trail. As I backed awkwardly down the trail out of sight, the woman's mortified teenage daughter exclaimed, "Mom!" And her mom retorted, "What? Animals do it." I gave her what I estimated was ample time to void a large bladder and get zipped up and on her way before I continued up the trail. But to my surprise, she was still hosing down the trail with impressive force. I again retreated. When I ventured back out, they were making their way up the trail. I balanced around the enormous puddle and past them, moving on as fast as I could. Story 30. Saw a lady change her kid's diaper on a dining table the one time I went to Olive Garden with a friend. I flagged down the lady bussing tables and warned her about it, as the lady left the dirty diaper on the table, and gave her my extra $5 since nobody should be dealing with that kind of situation. Story 31. I once saw someone pick their nose and then wipe it on the underside of a table when they thought no one was looking. It was pretty gross. and it made me a lot more cautious about touching public surfaces after that. Story 32. I was in line at Islands of Adventure for the Harry Potter ride. It was a very busy line with so many people, so I'm not sure what this person was thinking. Anyway, I saw this girl across the dividing rope from me, shove her entire hand into her rear, under her pants, dig in there, then pull her hand out and sniff it. What's wild to me is that there were people everywhere, but it seems no one even noticed but me. It was disgusting. Story 33. I was at a resort in Mexico and went in to have some lunch. I watched a guy take a scoop of guacamole, lick the spoon, and then put it back into the serving tray. Story 34. My boss picks at his face acne, then licks his hand and goes at it again. He also clips his fingernails at his desk. I gag so hard when I look at him. Makes for a fun day when I am in the office. Story 35. The way people treat customer service workers is sometimes pretty disgusting. That people think it is okay to bully essential workers is gross, or that table of people that just came from church who were trying their best to make the server cry and then not leave a tip, or worse, a religious pamphlet. People just flat out lying to a manager about an interaction to get free stuff.